Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the shortcut. Happy New Year, Greg. Happy New Year. Hope you had a fantastic New Year's Eve.
Same
New
to you.
Year, big stuff happening this year in video, I'm sure. And that's what we're here to talk
Yeah.
about today, as usual. Nothing's
Yeah.
changed. 1 year later, nothing's changed.
I know. I honestly think coming into this year, as is well covered on this podcast and elsewhere, a lot of marketing teams might kind of feel like, could we get a little bit less change maybe for the lead in the first month? Could
Hmm.
we have a little bit of steady state? But
Right.
you know what? I don't mean to be cliche. I guess January is really the month of cliches, but the only constant is change. Everybody knows that. But yeah, I think we wanted to kick off the new year with something that and we can get into this. I do feel we may see some areas of this like stabilize a bit, or maybe just more like mature is actually the better word for it. But I think we'll see like a lot of continued change this year, which is just like that intersection of AI meets video. We can maybe even broadly dabble in some like AI meets content predictions overall, but really, obviously, we want to focus on video. I mean, of course, that is our bread and butter, but also because we actually are fresh off of publishing a new survey where we had a bunch of hundreds of video creators reply to some questions that we had about like how they're using AI in their workflow, how they feel about it. I mean, really, the questions ran the gamut of kind of just like all things AI meets video creation. And we got the results back and published it. Really fascinating stuff. There were definitely a lot of questions that I think when you do a survey, you always have a few predictions of like, oh, I know how this one's going to go. And then a couple that I was like totally surprised by. So, yeah, to bring a little bit of data to this conversation, this like very, you know, tumultuous, kind of like hard to predict question of like, where does AI head from here? Like maybe
Yeah.
what's the current state of AI meets video? We've got some data and we've got some mildly hot takes probably that comes from
Yes.
that. So
Completely, hugely hot. Yeah, I can throw them up on here. We have a few slides for you with different visualizations of some of the feedback we got from people. And so I think we can just sort of go one by one and talk about the question that we asked, and also then, of
mhm.
course, the answer and why we think this is, and what we think might change in this next year. Um, so for this one, this was asking respondents where AI tools show up in their video production workflow. Um, and these are the top use cases. So up at the top, we see subtitling and transcription. Then we see script writing, then brainstorming, audio editing, voiceover, image creation, repurposing content, rough cutting, and video generation. And so
Mhm.
you can see that also the percentages next to them. So this is of everyone that said that they're already using AI in their workflow in the end of 2023. 2/3 of them are using it for subtitling. And then you can see those percentages decrease from there. But those
Yeah.
are pretty high numbers, like 2/3 of people using any AI at all. Or at least, I guess, of the people who marked yes.
Who use it. Yeah.
Um, but that's quite a bit for especially even just one feature.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think
yeah.
it's interesting, and Jack, I definitely, would love your take as someone who's the most hands-on, with video here at Kapwing. But I would say my initial impressions from this, like, so when we're drafting the question and we're writing the options and making sure there's room to kind of, even respond outside of these options, like my prediction was correct in that I thought video generation would be a bit lower in
Yeah.
compared to maybe the hype that it got this year. Because I had just heard from so many people and experienced it myself in terms of like, what can I make that's cool and kind of funny and impressive in the sense that like it came from nothing
Right.
versus like what could I make that was actually like publish worthy without like massive amounts of like manipulation or editing. you
Right.
know, that ratio is definitely in favor of like, I can create cool, funny things that I send to people or that we share in Slack. Check this out. Like, oh my God, this video had this one style and now it has this totally different format. It's so cool. But like publish ready stuff was definitely harder to come by.
Yeah.
I would say though that I was a little bit surprised, or maybe another way to frame this is like, I could see video generation growing a bit this year. I could see repurposing content though, like, you know, touching like 50% if we were to like rerun this even with a larger number of respondents or in like a broader number of industries. I could see repurposing content climb to like a 50% or at least like a top 3
Yeah.
use case this year. So I just think it was a little bit of a mix of like, yeah, like honestly, and not to, you know, not to like talk up Repurpose Studio, but a lot of the tools that released like earliest in the year, you know, a lot of them didn't actually let you edit the output. So once again, there was a lot of like
Right.
hype around these tools that could find a clip, but then the clip is kind of just like take it or leave it, you know, especially for I think the first half of the year. A lot of the tools were mostly like that.
Yeah.
And also just like, you know, people have to kind of, I think a lot of people's repurposing workflow was, you know, if they were experienced, it was already pretty established. And so you had to kind of tease out like, well, how exactly am I going to use this to make me faster?
Right.
You know, versus like we're all by, you know, probably earlier in the year, probably like spring, if not earlier than that, most content marketers had tried ChatGPT in some way. So like
Yeah.
everybody is playing around with like the tech stuff with like
Yeah.
script writing and stuff like that. So anyway, those were my kind of surprises. I'd be curious about like, yeah, like what stood out to you in terms of like either ran counter to what you expected or just maybe was what you expected. Would love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, my first instinct is just that, especially for the first one, for subtitles and transcription, that obviously that's quite a lot already, like 2/3 of people who use it. But I would even be interested in uh, thinking about like if you laid out more, I guess, clearly that like almost always subtitling at all has some AI usage in it now, that this number would
Interesting.
be even higher. Like this is of
Yeah.
course just people who said that yes, they use AI in their workflow, and I'd be interested in like of all the people who said no, like if
What are they
actually they
doing?
do, and if
Yeah.
yeah, and if they just didn't, you know, like I feel like we're at the point where some AI video features are actually so ubiquitous now that we don't even view them as AI. That's what I think about when I think about like subtitling. So I feel like this number could actually be even higher if people recognize that it was AI, but like it's just
Yeah.
so easy to use now that like I feel like a lot of people don't even know. Um,
Yeah. And I wonder if subtitles, like you said, is so commonplace that yes, number one, that's the reason they didn't consider it AI, or if in reality, like one way to read this is like this is also kind of a that specific use case is also kind of a survey on just like how many people use subtitles. Like
right,
since like everyone that would do them nowadays would use some sort of automated
right,
tool first, it's like maybe
yeah.
the rest of these folks just don't use them when they probably should. But
Yeah,
you know,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
I'm like not at all surprised also to see that yeah, the first 3 pretty much are all have to do with text. I think that's what AI is most successful at, and like all these other ones below, you know, audio editing and lower um are a lot more sort of like gray area about like whether or not
Mm,
sometimes that these tools are like truly helpful right now. I think
mhm,
I think these are actually in like a order that I would put them as well, like as a video creator. Like I
mhm.
I only use subtitled or like AI subtitles now. I do use AI for script help and for brainstorming. I do use it for audio editing, but sometimes it like doesn't feel that useful. And then
Mm,
like from there, I do use repurposing like probably higher than I where I would peg this, and
mhm,
rough cutting. But yeah, I definitely think like video generation towards the bottom is makes a lot of sense. I think if you asked if the question was have you ever used any of these once, the answer might be very different, because like
Yeah.
video generation had that hype. People were trying to use it, but like you said, like at first it just wasn't customizable, and so it didn't like make its way into or replace like any aspect, I feel like, of like a true workflow for a video creator. It was more of like a
Yeah.
novelty. Um, and so I'd be interested to see like if that number will grow as more customization comes in. And also I feel
Hmm.
like um I don't know, I feel like it's interesting because I feel like probably when most people think of video generation, it's like, it's very runway where like you're putting in
Text
a
to
text
video.
prompt and
Yeah.
it's like giving you that completely from scratch, where like I do feel like something that we have on Kapwing, shameless plug,
Hmm.
but it's actually maybe more realistic, at least in this year.
Current state. Yeah.
Yeah, is that you write in a text prompt and it's not generating like completely new video files from scratch, but it's like gathering B-roll and adding text, and adding like voiceover, AI voiceover on top of that.
Hmm.
Um, and like putting together sort of like almost like a now this video, rather
Yeah.
than like a completely new
Hmm.
generated file, if that makes sense.
Yep. That does make sense. I agree with that, and definitely something we plan to do. I'll say now is we plan to come back to a lot of these questions at a time kind of span that feels right. I was gonna actually say next year, but actually, it may be a shorter time frame than that when we feel like we need to check in and sort of say like, how do people, where do they kind of stand now? So you'll definitely hear follow-ups from us on this. I'm really, really interested in this one and plenty more, just in terms of like not only the state of things today, but like how it changes even within like maybe 6 months or something, right?
Yeah,
So definitely cool.
completely. All right, next we have a question on whether we were asking people whether or not generative AI video tools meet their expectations. Um, and I think this gets back to one of the reasons I feel like I just said, why video generation was so low on the list,
Hmm.
or rather completely at the bottom of the list,
Yeah.
um, was because most people do not feel like generative AI is helpful to their workflow right now, but they
Hmm.
can see the potential. And so again, yeah, it's like more of a novelty or more of something people are like keeping an eye on, but not really using.
Yeah, this question definitely had kind of like two purposes in a way, and I think that again, like you said, the other thing it kind of confirmed for me is that like the sentiment check. So not just like is it not really delivering, but does it feel like hollow? Do the promises feel hollow? And I mean, I guess the good news, I would say it's good news, obviously, because I like personally, even outside of working here, like would love for these tools to be more something that I could see myself using day to day.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like the kind of good news here is that like most people see the potential. So
Yeah.
most people were willing to say like straight up, no, not really hitting my bar today, but I don't think these are like empty promises or tools that go nowhere. I'm excited about where they go. But in terms of like, could most people hop into like what you kind of described as your, I guess, the most commonly perceived like generative tool of like a text to video type thing, a prompt to video. Could you get something that was like publish ready within the day? Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not for most brands. But yeah, I think long runway ahead. Definitely exciting future for these tools. So this is definitely one to watch. And I would love to see how this sentiment kind of like maybe fluctuates over time as we get new products and new features out there. So
Yeah, definitely. I think most people can see, obviously, like over 9/10 of people can see that there is some uses coming that like might be
yeah,
useful. It's just like maybe not there yet, or they haven't
yep,
tried the right tools. I feel like that's also like
very
the
true.
hard part, is because like there's a ton of tools coming out right now. There's a huge variety in what they can do, and quality differences. And even like I said already, like a generative AI tool like Runway that's completely making a video from scratch versus something like Kapwing that's like making it out of stock footage and voiceovers and text are like completely different
Hmm.
tools and use cases. So
Yeah, and maybe you see this kind of like dual thing happening where the tools get better and then people's expectations like get reset a little bit where it's
yeah,
like, oh, what I really need a generative tool to do is to like fill certain spots or to help me reach a certain style after I've got my own footage or to do stuff that like again would otherwise would take me a lot of time like more manually. But I no longer maybe have the expectation that's like create product launch video and like I just wipe my hands and I'm done, which
right.
like some people at the start of the year might have kind of felt like that's where we were going to get by summer, and it's just like we've got a little bit of ways to go, but there's probably other more precise things that they can do, that these tools can do in the interim, you know.
Yeah, completely. And then maybe a hot take. I don't know if this would be true, but I could also see it skewing in the other direction where more people start to think that generative AI is overhyped because their expectations were so high.
Mm,
Um, and I do think it'll take a while for, like that type of technology to like literally just be able to write in, making a product
yeah,
marketing video. Like, I don't know if that's going to happen
yeah, yeah, yeah.
this year. And so I would be interested, like maybe it actually skews the other way eventually.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
we will see. Next, we have a question we asked, which was how AI tools affect people's productivity of those who notified that they do use AI tools in their workflow. Um, and yeah, the vast majority, as you can see, like 90% said it was because it makes them a lot or at least a little bit more productive. Very few people thought that it made them less productive. And then there were some people
Hmm.
that were sort of more in the middle.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, which I think
This
is
m- most
fascinating, but also like,
unanimous. Yeah.
yeah, super unanimous. And I'm also
Yeah.
not surprised, like at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I was maybe surprised it was actually that high.
Yeah,
But I was not really surprised that it was like maybe the most unanimous, like of all the responses that there was the most consistency in the responses here. Because I think where your mind just goes towards with this question, especially is like even if you fiddled with like the generative stuff and haven't really kind of like sped up a workflow there. I mean, look at what the most common use cases were, all stuff that's like pretty established. Like I immediately myself think of like I generate transcripts instantly, I add subtitles automatically and make very minimal edits to it, and so on and so on. So I think the fact that like the use cases that were the most popular were probably like some of the most standardized, or like they were, they're kind of well worn and tried and true, makes it much easier for this question to be like an obvious yes, because you
yeah,
just immediately go to that stuff that's like I save 10 minutes like every time I do that. So of course I'm going to mark at least a like soft yes to this one, you know.
yeah, yeah. I think it's it's clear that there are certain tools at least that make you much more productive, at least for me. Like I keep harping on it, but subtitling, like I 2 years ago maybe was doing like subtitling for TikToks or whatever completely manually, and it was like so tedious. And now that I don't have to do that, it's like a no-brainer and I will never go back. Like
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
um and it was like not a hard switch at all. Like as soon as it became available, like the technology, I was like, okay, like that's it. Um so yeah, this does not really surprise me at
Hmm.
all.
Yep.
Cool. The next one is we asked people about their biggest challenges that they faced when using AI in the video editing process. And as you can see, the top thing was accuracy, then quality, and then there's a pretty big jump between those, and then ease of use, cost, something else, no issues, or buy-in.
Yeah.
Again, this is not very surprising to me. I feel like accuracy and quality are everything in video, especially for brands, especially for marketers,
Hmm.
and like we've been talking about, a lot of these tools don't have the like ready to post quality that I think people were hoping for, and I feel like um, that has turned some people off from
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah, I think like maybe the kind of hidden story, so to speak, or the like overlooked potential story here is like how low buy-in is as an issue. Um, Maybe something to just like mentally take note of. Marketing teams out there that are coming in with like a fresh budget for the new year. Um, I mean, judging from this, like if I'm sure this is like buy-in is always affected by how successful you are at showcasing the value of a tool internally before you get either budget approval or what have you, requisition approval um, to use it. But I do think like that tells a little bit of a story there where it doesn't seem like marketing leadership is all that hesitant right now to spend a little bit on tools that they assumingly feel like are going to get them some productivity gains or just help their teams be more productive. So that I thought was interesting. I did not expect for it to be very high, but for it to be so low as to be almost like negligible, I think just goes to show how like AI has really captured the minds of like leadership within most companies. And if you pitch, I think a reasonable proposal of like, we think we can use AI to do this faster or more efficiently, you'll probably get budget for the tool, which is interesting. So
Yeah, I guess so. I guess a part of me also wonders too, though, devil's advocate a little bit, of like,
yeah.
um, if these aren't the people making like the buy-in decisions, like maybe that isn't something that they're thinking about,
Interesting.
like,
Yeah.
um, or I don't know. Obviously, like as a marketer, you can present a tool to someone who is doing the buying, but like
Hmm.
I don't know, it might not be like top of mind. Um, and also like I don't know, it could not be as big of a deal depending on the size of the company, I think as well. Like if there's one marketer making video content and the buy-in, is $20 a month or whatever, like that's probably not
Hmm.
a huge deal. But like if you're buying like an enterprise deal for 100 employees
Yeah.
and now it's I don't know 2,000 or whatever per month, I think that's like a huge difference. And so I feel like it's hard for me to say like right off the bat like buy-in isn't important. It just might not be like the right audience, or I don't know. Like I don't know if I would mark that off, but I do think
Hmm.
like if I received this survey, but like I still think it is something to consider. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a couple of questions which we'll get to where we actually tease out like company size. This may be one to consider that for though in the future. Like if we can kind of tease out more like what's the individual story like by company size. And actually maybe a quick like kind of just like a side note for folks curious. Like our survey did include like both hands-on like video creators as well as team leads and companies of all sizes. And I think maybe the timing, if folks are curious too, could be important. It was around November that we sent this out. So that may affect things. I'm not sure exactly how I would weigh in on that like offhand.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it'll definitely be interesting to see again how this develops. And maybe in the future, like actually trying to tease out a little bit more of the story underneath of this here. But I
Yeah.
think, like you said, I think the headliner is just like, yeah, as soon as like as accuracy and quality gets better over time, expect to see like much more adoption of these tools because that seems to be like the highest hurdle to kind of jump over here. Like with
Yeah.
with a very distant third, basically, it seems like.
Yeah. I feel like buy-in also like it's not that big of an issue if the tools like aren't that great at
Yeah.
quality. Like you're not
Yeah.
gonna bring it to your team lead to ask to buy.
True.
So
Yeah.
so yeah, I feel like anyway, that's that. Next, we have sort of the same question about challenges with AI, but now it's split as we were just sort of talking about actually
Yeah.
between smaller companies and larger companies. And as you can see, there is a huge difference, I feel like, actually, in smaller companies really valuing quality and accuracy
Hmm.
more than larger companies. And as I guess I had noted, um, yeah, larger companies buy-in is much more important than it is for
Yeah.
smaller companies.
Yep, because I think you nailed it. Kind of. I mean, I was like super familiar with all of our upcoming slides, so I didn't want to spoiler it for you. But I think I think you sort of predicted this one, basically that like yeah, teams of teams of probably of like 3 or smaller, or even sort of like one man, one woman editing teams or creative teams. Uh, Probably don't face nearly as much resistance for the tools that they pitch internally because they're just not on like giant plans for these tools. Whereas larger companies, you may have to kind of adopt. I think everybody's gone through this. You may have to kind of adopt across multiple teams or even in like an entire department or something. So totally, I think at the bigger the company you sell into, the more there's like stakeholders and review. So definitely expect that. Um, like basically, the bigger you get, the more that comes up.
Yeah.
I think like yeah, I do think it is interesting. Like clearly, quality and accuracy is a big concern. Maybe it's like kind of to your point. Maybe like it's smaller companies like not having as many issues elsewhere that they listed that one because it's like, well, it's definitely not buy-in. So and
Yeah.
maybe like ease of use. It's like, well, we have time to to play around with it. And then cost obviously was included in that too. So again, it's not taking a lot out of our budget. So if it's easy to adopt, if it's easy to try out, if it's not costly to do so, really the only thing you have left to list is just like the quality concerns. So I would expect that. I do think like that probably is the main driver of that difference. But certainly it's you certainly do see that like even large companies with like them operating at scale and trying to like uh, you know grow their video programs and content programs into different markets, like all the localization work that they do and the just massive scale that a lot of companies produce content at. That still quality and accuracy is still a sort of major factor for them.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely smaller, but I do think given the context, it does tell a story of like, yes, like these tools, we still have ways to go with like improvement in terms of like the output for sure.
Definitely. Yes. I don't have too much to add for that, so we'll just go to the next,
Cool.
which is more about the future of AI now, which I think will be interesting to look at. So we asked people when you think about how AI will be used in video production the coming years, how do you feel?
Yeah.
And yeah, people were again pretty optimistic. Very optimistic is the highest, cautiously is next. And then of course there is a chunk of, nervous people and then some people who like don't really know. Which I think is not surprising. I feel like, that was a big and still is going to be a big thing to look at, is like
Yeah.
people feel like AI is unregulated. People feel like it could take people's jobs. But I feel like most people are not as like, aren't catastrophizing as much and more so thinking about how it could actually be helpful and save time and effort.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna do like a cut. I just want to check. Am I blurry? Am I?
You just blurred out like the 30 seconds ago or something.
Yeah, yeah. I was like, I could felt like I could see that from the preview image. What if I stand like here? I still feel blurry.
I feel like it might be autofocusing on your mic.
Oh, okay.
That's like so up front.
I'll bring this to the side. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Sorry.
You're good.
I'll cut right back into this. Yeah, I definitely think like I think what's maybe I did expect to see here was that when you look at some of these surveys done from like content teams that I think have a more traditional like editorial background, I do think that the optimism levels are like a bit different. I'm just going to be honest. I
Yeah.
think that most content teams that are, even if they are not video marketers, but they're kind of embracing video, I do think that they have a bit more optimism in terms of like AI's role in their work or like in content generally. Whereas I think the really editorially minded folks who really don't get outside of written content there's a bit more of a scare factor. Like there's a bit more hesitancy. Could be just like the chat GPT is like has been I guess I should say like has been a pretty good tool for like quite a while, whereas a lot of video tools are a bit newer. A lot of them, as we've seen, are maybe like not as impressive as generating fit to publish like final content as something like a chat GPT. I think as we've gone along here, like, like the GPT-4 output, super impressive. I do think a lot of writers have found like it still needs a lot of human intervention for most stories. But I think with video, it's kind of just like clear cut and obvious. It's like, of course, there still needs to be like plenty of human intervention here.
Yeah.
So I think that is the thing that I most expected, and I do think that this tells that tale a little bit. Is just like in the world of video where it's like AI is just like very clearly just a bit of an assistant, a side of desk like assistant that helps you. There's a lot more optimism. I hope that continues. I mean, I do feel like both, I guess, like creative discipline should be equally optimistic. I just think if you deal with video, it's a little bit more obvious that like you no need to ring the alarm or anything just yet. Like we're mostly just getting efficiency gains right now
Yeah.
and playing with cool new tools. We're still very early in the video game. So
Totally. Great. Next, we asked people who make video if they think AI will make video producers more creative. Those that said yes, this is the split. That around half of people, just over half, think it will automate tedious tasks. Then another quarter or so think more so about ideation, and then the last little bit less than a quarter said that it makes video creation more accessible. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think this is correct as well. I think already it's making tedious tasks, less annoying.
yeah.
I keep saying it, but subtitling, good example. Like, there's really no need for me to do those manually. It saves me time. And ideation as well. Like, it can sometimes be helpful to brainstorm with, GPT or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think number one is like I did expect the tedious task to be the top option. I think actually a callback to what you said earlier is that if more people labeled like really correctly labeled certain products as like AI powered or like AI kind of enhanced, that number might actually be like even higher.
Yeah.
I actually go right to trim with transcript for this one.
Yeah.
Like definitely it is sort of like AI under the hood that helps with that. And that helps me like edit a lot faster because like I'm still sort of like growing as like a video editor, and just like editing a rough cut with text is like so fast. And if you view that as AI, which it really is, like under the hood, even if like it's not always marketed that way, like I think there's even more features that would have people kind of listing the tedious tasks here. I actually am kind of like, I wouldn't say I'm bearish on this. I would say I'm a little bit surprised that ideation is as high as it is. I think like the barrier to video has mostly been like, to most people has been like, it's way harder to just make. You can 2 clicks write and publish something nowadays. And I don't mean generating text with chat GPT. I mean, like if you write something in Google Docs, you can hop on Twitter, Medium, whatever, and like in 2 clicks, you're published, right? And ready to go. Whereas like with video, it's like, yeah, even kind of the most like low fidelity video, it like takes some level of like get B-roll or footage, existing footage, record yourself, then edit it, then make sure the audio is right, potentially record separate audio over top of it. Like there's a lot going on. So
Yeah.
I would be like, I would expect that the accessibility consideration becomes actually more important than ideation. That would be kind of my take. So I'm surprised that ideation is that high. I may just be like, could just be different strokes for different folks here. Like maybe more folks really do appreciate that, like, hey, I need a sounding board and like AI is really helpful for like video angles and hooks and ideas. and they're getting a lot more value out of that than I would think. Because I just, for me, like, I've got, a list of video ideas like crowd in a spreadsheet, but it's just like it takes time. Like it's more so the time I know it's going to take me to produce them, and not necessarily lacking for like concepts,
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I think it depends. I do feel like a lot of content creators who are creating content like a lot do struggle with ideation.
Yeah.
So I think it can be a good partner, but like I don't know. At least for me, I like tend not to use it like consistently for ideation. I just feel like it's a little like it gives a little like vague responses.
Mm.
And it's also like, GPT is like trained on older data. So sometimes it doesn't feel like it's like keeping up with
Something that broke last
trends
week.
or
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
or anything like that. So I feel like I'd be optimistic about it, like if it starts to be able to take in data like as it's happening online. But until then, yeah, I'm a little bit like not as in that camp, I guess.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, and then lastly, this is the last slide we have. Again, this is comparing smaller to larger video companies about their nerves. So 18% of smaller companies report at least being somewhat nervous about AI use in video production, compared to 7% of larger companies. So it seems like larger companies, not seems like, I mean, it's showing us that, yeah, larger companies or people in larger companies really aren't as just anxious, I think, about AI.
Yeah. I would say this, my best guess for this one would be like purely workload. I think it might feel like counterintuitive at first because you're just kind of like, well, the big company has like a lot of scale. Probably they are producing a ton. Wouldn't that make folks inside those companies more nervous about AI because it's probably going to be widely used and it's used for every video or it's used for key parts of the process? But what I think is showing up here is just like lots of smaller companies when they start with, I mean, content teams generally are I wouldn't say they're among the smallest within marketing, but certainly a lot of companies get by with a small marketing team like overall relative to like R&D or sales or something like that. So I think like when you have, I think in smaller companies you just have more of these like team of one type folks. Um,
Yeah.
and perhaps like perhaps like the micro teams or team of one folks just have a little bit more concerns of like, I think it's false, but I'm trying to, give a steelman case, or I'm trying to like interpret what I think they're feeling, which is like, oh, maybe they'll be able to replace like just me, like with AI tooling or something like that. Again, I think extremely unlikely. I just think like when you're the only person doing something, there may be more of like a nervousness there that you could be replaced. Whereas like in these like massive companies, they just have like so much to produce. It's kind of obvious that they will still definitely need a team of people to do this.
Yeah.
Like some folks have worried that maybe those teams will get smaller. Again, I think that there's like a lot that remains to be seen there. I definitely don't believe in like any of the like cataclysmic predictions people have that's like within 24 months and stuff. I mean, that's just me personally. But yeah, I could see like big teams being like, they're definitely going to need us. Like we just producing so much, they're going to need people to run point and wrangle all this video creation and production. Whereas like in those very small teams, maybe they're just feeling like, as a team of one, I can maybe see like key parts of my job being like automated away or something like that. That would be
Yeah.
my best guess,
Yeah, I also think there's potentially nervousness almost around the opposite concern, which is like if you're a small team of one, your, higher ups or whatever might expect you to be putting out like 10 times the amount of content, right?
Yeah, good point.
And while like AI might make some parts of the process easier, like right now it doesn't make it 10 times faster, probably realistically. You're not going to
Right.
be able to get out like truly 10 times the content because like we said, like there's still a ton of like usually manual edits that need to be made in like and not even just edits, but like just even looking over it. And then
Hmm.
it's a whole process. And usually you're not getting like a ready to post AI generated piece of content.
Hmm.
But I feel like a lot of times these like visionaries in the company like expect the output to be way higher because like we've been promised these tools are,
Yeah.
increasing output really
Yeah.
quickly. And so I think that also is a case for concern for like smaller companies. Whereas like for larger companies, you know, you might not see that. Well, firstly, yeah, it would be spread out if there were different
Hmm.
expectations amongst like the entire team. And also I feel
Hmm.
like larger companies are just like less quick to change their expectations generally because like they've gotten successful somehow and like there's a lot of hoops to go through to like
Yeah.
fully change a strategy. And so I think like that's probably less of a concern as well.
Yeah. And I think you also touched on like people at smaller companies juggle a lot more.
Mhm.
So if like AI tools come kind of bundled with like expectations around like output, that in some ways can actually be harder at a smaller company because like
Yeah.
although you could probably move faster in terms of like not as much like process in your way, you have these like other things that you need to do. Whereas when you're working at like a really truly big scale, like I have in some of my previous roles, like the team's like number one objective with a bullet is like just scale the output because you have this, and it's not like a not caring about the creative, it's just like you have this like big program that just works, and
Yeah.
the best bit of leverage you have is just like, well, take all this English content and localize it to Spanish, or
Yeah.
like change the output from 3 videos to a week to 5, and like really that is actually a lever for your growth because you can get the budget and you can hire people and you just have all these like kind of resources to scale things up and make it big, 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 right? Whereas, yeah, AI comes around and definitely saves smaller companies a lot of time, but maybe that like expectation around output, stresses out the smaller teams a little bit more because they have to kind of wear the everything hat as well.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I feel like that is definitely could be a piece of this as well.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, that about concludes the slides I have with the data from our survey. Um, Pretty interesting stuff here. I think we have a really interesting year ahead of us to see uh, how AI meets people's expectations or not. I think this will be a pretty critical
Yeah.
year. Um, and I'm really interested to see if it can meet our expectations because I think people have really large expectations of AI right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. And I think this is like, I was so excited to like kind of get this out when we did because I think the most interesting story will be how it develops. I think that the moment in time data is really cool and interesting. It definitely shines a light on some questions I had. And we'll obviously like, housekeeping here, but in the show notes, like we'll link the full data story and all the context behind it. But I really do think like, yeah, the real story is like how this unfolds and basically how it changes over time. And I think in future, reports and maybe episodes, we would love to show like, here's how this is like grown in adoption. Here's how this belief has either like cooled off or actually like had gotten hotter, or gotten more maybe debated or contentious over the months. So yeah, I think I would love to come back to this basically and
Yeah,
see how things pan out because the opinions we'll all get for free. The data will be harder to come by, so hopefully we can bring back some data as we go here.
totally. Yes. Well, I think that about is it for today. Happy New Year, everyone. Like I said, really interesting year ahead. Make sure to keep up with us on this channel. Subscribe. We post videos every week where we unpack video topics for marketers. And yeah, we'll keep a close eye on these topics and AI's usage this year. So make sure to follow along. And yeah, thanks for watching.
Thanks so much for joining us. And if anybody watches this episode and sees an avatar of me in replacement of what I actually said, give me a heads up. Jack's been playing around with that, so he may try to actually outsource me and kick me out of the show. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's why smaller companies are afraid.
It was actually me. I was in the responses of like very nervous to be kicked off of my favorite
Yes.
podcast. So
Yeah. Sweet. All right. Later, all.
take care.